Harjeet, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We're in Nairobi, which is crazy to me. I don't know if it's crazy to you. This is a wild experience. And you've got your talk coming up tomorrow afternoon.
That's right.
How are you feeling?
Excited.
Good. Good.
Very excited.
Can you give us a sneak peek of what you're going to be talking about? You don't have to tell us all the detail, but what's the theme and how are you feeling?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much, Ben, for having me in this conversation.
It's my pleasure.
So I'll talk about adaptation for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One, the world needs it much more than the kind of attention we have given it to. And I'm also trying to bring some hope back in the kind of climate chaos that we see all around us.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to talk about some practical examples and the initiatives that people have taken at various levels, from community to cities to the policy level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really to inspire people and engage them in the adaptation conversation and say that all of us can do it.
Oh, the adaptation conversation that's a big conversation. And this is always I should never ask this question about what you're going to talk about, because now I'm like, oh, tell me more about that. But we're not going to do that. If you want to know more, listen to the talk when it's out, when it's live, which it might be live at the time that this recording comes out. We'll see.
Okay.
But speaking of initiatives, you are the director at Satat Sampada.
That's right.
Yes.
You got it
right. Yes. Pronunciation is very important. Would you tell us a little bit about what that is and what work it is that you're doing with the foundation?
Sure. So I'll talk about this initiative that actually started in 2016. Mm-hmm. I'm sure we all, or many of us, celebrated Paris Agreement in 2015. I did not. To be honest.
I'm like, I guess so.
Because some of us knew that the direction is right, but not the ambition.
Right.
And so I'm not a policy person. I've been a practitioner working on the ground, but climate crisis pushed me to engage much more in the policy rooms and, conference rooms and hallways. But I always realized that I can't continue with this very important policy advocacy work unless and until I continue with my connect with the ground.
Okay.
I came back from Paris, and my wife, who has been working with the urban poor, also felt a similar situation when you get to see the exodus from rural areas and nothing is stopping. And climate crisis, of course, one of the major factors in the agrarian crisis that we see in India. We just put our heads together and said, we have to do something. However small the initiative is, we have to go back to the roots, start addressing the problems that people are facing in rural areas and connect that with the concerns that people in the urban areas have. That was the birth of Satat Sampada in 2016, and focusing much more on sustainable agriculture and going back to agroecology, but also doing a lot more policy engagement. And that journey continued, and another organization that I then co-founded is Satat Sampada Climate Foundation, so that we can continue to work on the ground with farmers and with communities on ground, but also engage at the policy level. So that's the whole spectrum of these two organizations that I'm part of.
Okay, so Satat Sampada is policy, and the foundation is working on the ground with
it's the other way around.
Okay, the foundation is doing the policy work.
Exactly.
And the organization is working
It's like a social impact organization, like an enterprise, working with farmers, working with consumers. So you require a different setup to enable that. Whereas the foundation, which is doing much more policy engagement work, of course, will continue connecting with the work on ground. You can't just
do one. You can't do them siloed. You can't do them in isolation.
Both are connected.
Right. Okay. So we talk a lot on this podcast about climate justice, and I'm like, I don't come from a climate background. I don't really know what I'm talking about at all, but I do ask good questions because I'm very inquisitive. And I think climate justice is one of those phrases that's kind of bandied around a little bit. We throw it about, but what does that mean? And specifically, what does climate justice mean in the context of people in the global south? What are we talking about when we're talking about climate justice?
I'm so happy you're asking this question, Ben,
I
because
told you, that's good.
we do see the climate justice on placards a lot more than what we saw 10 years ago, which is great. We heard much more on climate action than climate justice. And the justice word is really important for the global south. What do we actually mean by justice? For us, it's about equity, and it's about the fair share of action that countries have to take. And it's also about human rights, particularly of people who are facing the climate crisis as we speak. So why climate justice? Because we know the climate crisis that we are facing today is a result of bunch of countries and corporations who took much more than the fair share of atmospheric space, polluted it heavily. Their industrialization was built on that pollution, and that has caused the crisis in the first place. Whereas majority of people in the global south are suffering from these climate impacts. So for us, it's about justice. It's about reparations. It's about making sure that countries and corporations who have done most in causing the problem have to do much more than what they are doing now in fixing the crisis and supporting developing countries and vulnerable communities in dealing with the impacts.
So, like, how do people? Because that to me sounds like the right idea. It sounds like a brilliant idea that there should be some form of reparations given to people who have been disenfranchised or disproportionately affected by the actions of really quite a small bunch of large polluters. But in practice, what does that actually look like? Are there initiatives that are up and running at the moment that are like starting to put that kind of movement towards reparations into practice? Is it taking a physical form?
Yeah, it has. If you look at reparations in general, beyond climate, we are talking about reparations against the atrocities that have been done on indigenous people, for example. Look at the racism and slavery. We do talk about reparations in that context. When we talk about climate, it's about recognizing the historical responsibility. It's about holding the polluters to account. It's about asking them to do more and particularly move away from fossil fuels, which is the core cause of the problem, and support adaptation and dealing with loss and damage. So the challenge is that in the UN climate space, UNFCCC as we call it, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the term reparation, it's a mouthful. The term reparations or compensation will never land as an official lingo. Why? Because everything is agreed by consensus. One country can veto. Right? Whereas when we talk about the way we are approaching climate action or the way we implement climate justice, the spirit of reparations and compensation has to be at the heart of it. And that's what connected us with our fight for climate finance or loss and damage mechanism that we have set up. It's about people who have caused the harm have to provide money to repair it.
Okay, so I've heard about this loss and damage mechanism. It's a fund?
It's a fund, yes.
Okay, and it started at COP27, was it?
That's where it was agreed.
Was it you that did it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a big deal.
I shouldn't take the entire claim, but there's no doubt that I have been fighting for it since 2010, when this was almost a non-issue among the civil society and majority of governments. The credit should actually go to the small island states. It was 1991 when Vanuatu, on behalf of the small island states group called AOSIS, actually brought that up. Not exactly the same phrase, but said we need to start dealing with sea level rise, because for them, it has always been an existential issue. But it did not survive in that framework. You remember the mouthful? United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was agreed in 1992. But the conversation continued, albeit very, very slowly. And then it picked up momentum 2 decades later. So, of course, from civil society side, I have been involved right at the core and working with movements to push for that issue. And eventually we got that first agreement, as you said, Ben, at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. That was a historic moment. Because
because this doesn't sound like the type of thing that all of the countries in the world would want to agree to doing, right? Like, it sounds like quite a pretty big thing that you've managed to achieve there, or you in community with other people have managed to achieve. Can you break down for me a little bit about what the Loss and Damage Fund is and how it functions and what that looks like?
Sure. And I must also say why we talk about loss and damage, because the whole world is generally very conversant about reducing greenhouse gas emissions or protecting forest.
Yeah, decarbonizing.
Decarbonization. So those things belong to a phrase called mitigation, which means you are actually mitigating the risk, right? Then the second part is adaptation, which means that there is some impact that is always going to be there because we have got some kind of temperature rise locked in. In fact, now we are living in a 1.6 degree warmer world. I'm talking about the concept way back in 1990s. So even then, some amount of warming was locked in. So we knew that some impacts are going to be there, but we thought we will be able to adapt to those impacts. So adaptation, something that picked up much more around 2001 comprehensively.
So mitigation, adaptation, and
then you realize that there are some unavoided or unavoidable and irreversible impacts for which you need to actually help communities recover from.
Right.
What happens when I lose? So if you say, I'm giving you money to retrofit your home so that your home doesn't get impacted by floods or cyclones. Thank you. That's adaptation.
I appreciate that.
But what happens when I lose my home? When I lose my farm? Right? When there's a loss of life, loss of biodiversity, right? Loss of land. It's gone permanently. That's not adaptation. That's addressing loss and damage. And there was nothing in the UN climate system. That's why we had to fight for it for 30 years. And eventually we got that agreement at COP27. So that's why you need this fund, which is now kind of a third pillar of climate action to help people recover from climate impacts.
And COP27 was... What year was that? That was
2022.
So until 2022, when people were losing their land, losing their homes, losing loved ones, people were losing life, there was no financial support for any of those
30
people.
years.
That is crazy.
I would say support was there, but as the humanitarian action, which is more like solidarity, that comes from people like you and me and some cooperation from governments. It was not based on responsibility and obligation. And let me say one more thing why it is important. 90% of disasters that we are facing in the world are weather related, getting intensified by climate. Others are geophysical, like earthquakes and connected to tsunamis or other kinds of epidemic and so on. So climate is a major chunk which is connected to all the disasters that we are facing right now. So that's why it's important.
This is incredible. So I was in on safari in Lake Naivasha, I think it's called, the other day, and I think this is maybe the first time I'd ever seen anything like this, where we're looking at a lake and there were all of these like dead tree trunks pointing up out of the water, and they'd said that because of climate change, the water level was rising, and so the lake was just increasing in size, but you could see tops of buildings coming out of this lake. Obviously there were like loads of hippos and animals in there, but I think that was the first time I'd ever seen face to face actual displacement, like actual destruction that's caused by a climate crisis, rather than just seeing it on the television or on social media. So it's incredible that we've got this fund now that people can do they apply for it? How does that work? Or it's distributed based on the damages that are seen? But what needs to happen to make sure that that's being used responsibly and effectively? Like, are there frameworks around that? Is there an acronym for the framework around how it's used?
It's a good question. Very good question. So first of all, the name of the fund now is Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage.
Okay.
And it has been provided the legal identity by the Philippines, and it's hosted temporarily by the World Bank. And we have had 5 board meetings so far. The 6th one is happening in the Philippines. So what has happened, that we have been able to set up the secretariat, which is really important to get things going. The fund now has commitments of about $768 million, which happened at COP28 in Dubai. But the hard part is that barely or less than half has actually reached the bank account, and we are still waiting for that money to be realized. There's a much bigger challenge. This amount is a drop in the ocean,
right?
Because
that sounds like a lot.
Exactly, it sounds like it's exactly. The estimates are we need close to $400 billion.
Oh, wow.
$400 billion annually in developing countries alone. Now, from that perspective, it's important that we now have an institution.
Yeah.
We are now working on setting up systems and policies and all those things. There was an agreement at the last board meeting in Barbados that we are setting aside $250 million as a startup program, so that we are not waiting for the other money to come in. Let's start helping people, because it's urgent. People
it's
are
happening now.
Yeah, people are suffering. So the fund is in motion. So let me, for your audience, to give 3 keywords for people to remember easily. What are the core issues with the loss and damage fund? Scale, speed, and access.
Okay.
Right. So we need to make sure that it reaches the right scale. As I said, the gap is not even $1 billion to $400 billion annually. Right. Speed. When people are affected, they need money now to recover from those impacts. Delay means more poverty, more inequality, more displacement, more migration. Right? We can't afford that. Third is access. Government should have a direct access to the fund, because if you look at the current financial system, the kind of conditionalities that are put, the kind of arm twisting that happens between the multilateral banking system and countries, developing countries I'm talking about,
right.
It's horrible.
They're never going to see that money.
So we need access to governments for the large infrastructural work, but also to communities, because communities must be at the center of this recovery that we are seeing or needs to happen.
Yeah.
And that's why community access is important. Yeah. And then, of course, around it, we need stronger governance systems and accountability systems at all levels. Developed countries are responsible for providing money at scale, and developing countries should spend that money properly so that it reaches whom it is intended for.
I like talking to you now. I like talking to you because you make really complicated things sound very simple. So I feel like I understand what you're saying. We're talking about the scale of how much money is needed, the speed that it's rolled out, and people having access to that, and people being governments and communities.
Wonderful.
But that's complicated. That's a lot of things to sort out in a pretty quick period of time. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if the governments can get access to that money, then who decides where the money goes? Or especially if there's not enough money already, who decides how that money is distributed fairly? But maybe another conversation for another day. I don't know. So
that's the heart of the issue right now, being discussed by the Secretariat. So you're spot on.
Okay, right. And I'm not the Secretariat, so I don't need to worry about that bit. But your work has got you in the middle of these conversations between what I'm assuming now is the global north and the global south. Yeah. And so I'm wondering, are there success stories? Like, what's going well in regards to that kind of communication? Because I think we're talking about a pathway of communication that has for a long time been very broken.
Yeah.
You mentioned that first COP with the islands in Vanuatu.
Yep, 1991.
And from what I understand of that, they were just being completely ignored, right? And every time they were asking for something, it was being vetoed and people were saying no. So how is that channel of communication working at the moment? Is that going well?
It has been okay. Good thing first.
Okay. Yeah. What do they call that?
It's much better than what we faced during those first 30 years after getting the convention, to the extent that rich countries were deliberately trying to muddy the waters by saying, oh, there's nothing called loss and damage, it's adaptation. I explained how loss and damage is different from adaptation. No, we should talk about how we can do mitigation more and adaptation more. Let's not talk about it. Why? Because they always connected that, and it is connected with reparations and compensation. But we were also working in the collaborative spirit. We said, you agree to a mechanism, you provide resources, we will not bring up the aspect of reparations and compensations in the legal terms. Morally, it is about reparations, it is about compensation, right? And because of all those reasons, because they were really fearing of unlimited liability, they actually did not allow that conversation to happen. After we got that at COP27, things have changed. We have seen how developed countries have engaged much more constructively as part of the transitional committee which led to the fund after a year. And even during the fund board meetings, I see a different mood. It should be and must be much, much better, as I said, because we still have a massive scale problem. But it is a success of multilateralism to recognize, and of course, civil society played a very important role to set that bar, put pressure on governments, working very closely with media, and a big thanks to the media that actually brought that up, and social media that helped us make that a big issue at COP27, and the pressure continues. And now we see that there's a fairly constructive way of setting up the secretariat and developing these policies. Exactly the question you asked, Ben, who gets the money first? What are the trigger mechanisms? All that is happening right now.
Okay, so we're seeing progress.
Yeah,
we have seen this progress. Is really interesting for me because I'm still trying to make my mind up. I know very little, but I'm still trying to decide whether COP is a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if it actually works.
Well, there's always good cop and bad cop,
yeah,
right?
Right, good cop, bad cop. Yeah, is a good way of thinking of it. So in terms of the barriers to progress, you said that stuff needs to change more quickly, more things need to happen. What are the barriers to that progress that we're seeing right now?
Trust deficit still remains.
Okay.
Because what developed countries did in the first 30 years, the way they're still trying to see that fund remains a tiny fund, which it's there because there was a huge demand, but doesn't reach that level so that they don't have to put that kind of money. And sometimes bringing in those policy aspects which are going to become conditionalities and will not allow that direct access for both countries and communities. So I think that, and rich countries have to step up to bridge that deficit.
Okay, so trust is a big
a big thing. And then, of course, the scale of money that needs to be mobilized. And this is where, we have a lot of alternatives and solutions that we mentioned. Start taxing the fossil fuel industry. Why are you not doing that? It's the fossil fuel industry that's responsible for the crisis.
Yeah, if we're talking about reparations.
Yeah, so we have climate damages tax. You can put a levy on the extraction and actually make them pay. That's what we really have to do. You can put a tiny tax on the financial transactions. You can raise billions of dollars. You can shift the fossil fuel subsidies, which are in trillions of dollars, right? And it's about money going from wrong places to the right places. So money can be generated, which is looks like a challenge. It's actually not. What we need is a political will, right? So that we can fill that fund to that level.
And those kinds of taxes, I imagine, serve as number one, a direct route to that money for the reparations, but also as a deterrent, right? To fossil fuel companies to kind of try and dissuade them from continuing. Okay, I get that. This makes a lot of sense. I'm having such a nice time. I love it when I understand what people are talking about. All right, so I want to think for a second. We're talking a lot about financial aid for communities that are experiencing harm. And I'm wondering, outside of that financial aid, what else are the most critical forms of support that can be provided for those communities? I'm sure everything in some way links to finances, right? Because you have to have finances to give things to people. But what else does that kind of stuff look like?
So first of all, we need to start looking at the kind of damage that's happening, which can be monetized. Not everything can be done in that manner that you put a dollar value. Loss of life. Of course, there is an economics link to that person who we lost.
Yeah.
But then you cannot replace, the emotions and the role of that person.
Yeah.
Right. Loss of biodiversity. Loss of cultural sites. Lot of religious sites. So you can't replace that with money. But of course, you still need financial system to help that recover.
Yeah.
Right. To provide some support to families who can visit those sites again, and that would require money.
Yeah.
Right. Some kind of grieving. Mental health is a massive issue.
Yeah.
If you lose all those things, your home, your livelihoods, and your dear ones, your burial sites, so you need to also provide psychosocial support.
Yeah.
So we can't even imagine at this moment how much are we missing in terms of a comprehensive response to what people are facing in the form of climate crisis. So it has to go way beyond, and we are actually trying to talk about some of these so-called, it was a bad term called non-economic loss and damage, but we characterize it as social, cultural, and ecological loss and damage that's happening. The other aspect which we really want the world to give attention to is there are some new challenges that we are facing, and global community is not ready. Sea level rise, glacier melt, oceans are turning far more acidic, which is going to affect the marine life and livelihoods of people who depend on seas and oceans. Migration, massive issue. We are not ready for it. So the world has to come together to find those solutions collectively.
So we're dealing with problems here that are not things that can be solved by just throwing money at people or throwing money at communities. It's going to have to be some kind of collaborative effort to work with people to understand what those needs are. And that cultural heritage loss is such an interesting point, right? Because how do you replace someone's religious site? How do you replace the loss of a person's life or the loss of a biodiverse environment? And when people, especially when climate migration is going to be increasing and people are going to be moving from one place to another and settling in new lands, it's going to be very, very difficult. But I love the fact that we're thinking about it. I mean, I think it feels positive.
That's true.
It feels like it's
better late than never.
Yeah, and I guess doing the best you can to turn something that is inherently negative into something that can be positive by at least providing people with the support that they need after the fact when those things have happened. This is such an interesting conversation for me. I guess to bring us to a close and maybe to wrap up the conversation here, I'm thinking about what for the people who are listening at home, for our listeners on the Climate Curious podcast, what advice would you give to people who are in the global north? Lots of our listeners are people who live in cities, people who are not often coming face to face with some of these changes. We know even that is starting to change. We've seen fires in LA and all of these kinds of natural disasters that are starting to encroach on the cities that we live in. But in terms of giving advice to people who want to push for climate justice, but maybe are not sure what that looks like in their context, what would you say are some good steps or maybe the best steps that people can start to take towards that kind of climate justice?
So Ben, first of all, a big thank you and kudos to young people in the global north, people in Japan, to Germany, to Australia, to UK, to even the United States and Canada. These young people went way beyond their comfort zone and started demanding climate justice. If I'm honest, initially they didn't know what climate justice is, right? But they were holding those placards, which was an important message.
Yeah.
And now, because I do work a lot with young people and I do a lot of sessions and interact with them, including on the concept of reparations, they are internalizing it. And the fights that we are fighting is not between global north and global south. It's about, initially we used to say 1% versus 99%. Now it's about 0.1% versus 99.9%. People in the global north are also suffering.
Yeah.
I remember the phrase when all these wars are hitting us, that people in the UK and the West had to choose between heating and eating. Look at the energy prices.
Yeah.
So we are in this together. No doubt that the global north governments and the corporations that come from that part of the world are most responsible for the crisis, not those individual people. We are with them. We are together in this crisis. What I really want them to do is to understand climate justice even further, because the kind of historical injustices that we are referring to, it's not just about carbon molecule. It's also linked to the colonization that happened, that racism that we have seen over centuries, right? The apartheid that we still see in our societies, the wars that are going on. It's all connected. It's the same system. So how do we look at it as a systemic issue, not just a manifestation that we see in the form of climate crisis or biodiversity crisis? It's a systemic problem, and it's about historical injustice. Understanding that, communicating that with people in the global north, and holding their governments and corporations to account that you not only have to fix that system back home, because they're also suffering from that system, the economic system and the whole financial system, that's very much part of it. How to also transfer that wealth and resources to developing countries so that they can take climate action. One more thing which I always remind people, even if you clean your home in the global north, the fact is majority of emissions are now coming from the global south, about 2/3. Why? Because large population is there and they are now beginning to industrialize. It is in your esteemed self-interest to help developing countries to also turn green and clean. Right? So one, it's your moral responsibility. Second, it's your own self-interest to look at this world as one, because climate is one.
An important message. I was going to say an important message for the listeners, but an important message for me, I think, even just in understanding, number one, how things are connected, and number two, understanding the historical imperative or understand the historical impact of how all of these systems have functioned. We're talking about systems of racism, systems of classism, systems of sexism, things that have existed for long times and are quite deeply, I would say, embedded in the ways that we think.
Indeed.
And even in the new systems that we're trying to build, we see these things showing up again and rearing their ugly heads again.
We're calling it neocolonialism, right? In the name of greening, we are seeing new ways of extracting. And now, again, we are going back to Africa and Latin America and other parts where we see those so-called critical minerals. So we don't want that neocolonialism to come back in full force. So we need to challenge that, and we need support from the global north and having that partnership between global south and global north. We are all in this together.
Yeah. So a deep unlearning and an understanding that we're all connected. We're all fighting the same fight. We're all in it together. Yeah. Harjeet, man, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, I can't. The listeners will know that when things make sense to me, I hold on to it. I'm like, oh, this is refreshing. I love understanding things. But thank you so much for coming and sitting with us and for sharing your perspective, sharing your expertise, and also for being incredibly encouraging. I think it's one of the things that we miss a lot is that there are positives that we can find and there's progress that's being made and there's things for us to celebrate, as much as we also have to hold the right groups, the right people accountable, and ourselves in lots of ways accountable for some of the harms that are being done. But I really, really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And I must say, I'm an eternal optimist, and I do have deep faith in humanity and our collective wisdom and what we can do in this world. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure that you get next week's releases. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and a review.
Now, let's shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
Executive produced by Josie Coulter.
Produced by Ben Beheshti.
Music also by Ben Beheshti.
Communications by Tara Cooper and Izzy Gladstone.
Curation by Disha Chandra.
Hosted by Ben Hurst.
And Mariam Pasha.
And remember,
stay curious.